Hello and welcome Whispering Bee family. This is a story about Julie and Chris, and I need to tell you up front, this one's going to hurt. Because their story is real and it didn't get a happy ending, and sometimes that's just how it goes. But there's something in here that matters. Something about love and loss and what we do when the person who made us feel safe is gone. Julie met Chris at a concert she didn't even want to go to. Her roommate had an extra ticket because her boyfriend bailed last minute, and Julie was in the middle of studying for her biology exam. She was 24, in grad school, living off instant ramen and coffee, and the last thing she wanted was to stand in a crowded venue on a Tuesday night. But her roommate wouldn't stop bugging her, so she went. Chris was there with his brother. He worked in construction, had paint on his jeans from a job he'd finished that afternoon, and he wasn't really into the band either. His brother dragged him along because, in his words, "You work too much and you need to actually have a life." They ended up standing next to each other because the venue was packed. Julie's roommate disappeared to get drinks. Chris's brother went to talk to some girl he recognized, and there they were. Two people who didn't want to be there, surrounded by people who were way too into it. Chris looked over at her and said, "You here for the music, or did someone drag you too?" Julie laughed. "Dragged, completely dragged. I have an exam in 2 days." "Construction deadline tomorrow," he said, "but apparently I work too much." And that was it. That's how it started. No big romantic moment, no love at first sight, just two tired people making conversation because they were both stuck there. They talked through half the concert. Julie's roommate came back and gave her this look like, "Who is this guy?" And Chris's brother eventually found them and was honestly shocked that Chris was actually talking to someone. They exchanged numbers before leaving. Julie thought maybe he'd text in a few days. He texted her before she even got home. Just said, "So when's your exam? Want to grab coffee after to celebrate surviving it?" She said yes. Their first actual date was at this tiny coffee shop near campus. Chris showed up early. Julie showed up late because her exam ran over and she was stressed and apologizing, and he just smiled and said, "It's fine. I ordered you a coffee. Wasn't sure what you liked, so I guessed." He'd gotten it completely wrong. She didn't have the heart to tell him. She drank the whole thing. They sat there for 3 hours. Not because the coffee was good or because the place was special, but because they kept talking and neither of them wanted to leave. Chris told her about growing up with two brothers, how he'd always been good with his hands, how he liked building things because you could see the result of your work. Julie told him about losing her dad when she was 16, how she'd wanted to go into medicine, but ended up in research instead, how she was tired all the time but couldn't imagine doing anything else. "You're going to save lives," Chris said. Julie shook her head. "I'm going to sit in a lab and look at cells under a microscope." That's how it starts though, right? Someone has to do that part. She'd never thought about it that way. When they left, Chris walked her back to her car even though it was out of his way. He didn't try to kiss her, just said, "Can I see you again?" Julie said yes again. They fell into this rhythm. Chris would text her in the mornings before work, just something simple like "good luck today" or "coffee." Julie would send him pictures of ridiculous things she saw in the lab. They'd meet up whenever her schedule allowed, which wasn't often, but Chris never made her feel bad about it. He just showed up when she had time. 3 months in, Julie invited him to her apartment. Her roommate was out of town, and she'd attempted to cook dinner, which was ambitious considering she mostly survived on takeout. Chris showed up with flowers, which made her laugh because nobody had ever bought her flowers before. "What?" he said. "Is that weird?" "No, it's sweet. I just wasn't expecting it." Dinner was a disaster. She burned the chicken, underseasoned the vegetables, and the rice was somehow both mushy and undercooked. Chris ate it anyway, told her it was great. She called him a liar. He laughed and said, "Okay, it's terrible, but I appreciate the effort." They ordered pizza instead. That night they stayed up until 3 a.m. talking. Julie told him things she hadn't told anyone, about how scared she was of failing, how she sometimes felt like she was pretending to be smart enough to be in grad school, how she missed her dad every single day and sometimes forgot what his voice sounded like. Chris listened. He didn't try to fix it or tell her it would be okay. He just listened. And then he told her about his mom. How she'd gotten sick when he was in high school, how he'd watched her go through treatment, how she survived but it changed everything. How that's why he didn't take anything for granted. Life's too short to waste time on things that don't matter, he said. Julie kissed him for the first time that night. A year later, they moved in together. It was a small apartment, kind of cramped, with a kitchen that barely fit both of them. But it was theirs. Chris built shelves for all of Julie's books. Julie made space in the closet for his work boots and paint-stained clothes. They figured out how to share the bathroom, how to split chores, how to exist in the same space without driving each other crazy. It wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes. Julie got stressed about school and would shut down. Chris worked long hours and came home exhausted. There were nights when they barely talked, mornings when they were both too tired to function. But they always figured it out. Chris started leaving notes for Julie around the apartment, stupid little things on Post-its. "You're going to do great today. Don't forget to eat lunch. I love you even when you're grumpy." Julie kept every single one of them in a drawer. 2 years in, Julie finished grad school. Chris took the day off work to be there when she defended her thesis. He sat in the back of the room, completely out of place in his jeans and hoodie while everyone else wore business casual, and he stayed for the whole thing even though he didn't understand half of what she was talking about. After, when it was over and she'd passed, he picked her up and spun her around right there in the hallway. "I told you, you're going to save lives." "I still have to find a job first," she said. "You will." She did. 3 months later, she got an offer at a research hospital 2 hours away. It was a good position, exactly what she'd been working toward, but it meant they'd have to move. Julie was scared to tell Chris. They'd built a life here. He had his job, his friends, his brother lived nearby. She told him over dinner, just blurted it out. "I got a job offer, it's 2 hours away. I don't know what to do." Chris didn't even hesitate. "We move, obviously." "But your job." "I can find another job. There's construction everywhere. You've been working toward this for years. We're going." So they moved. Chris proposed on a Tuesday. Not a special Tuesday, just a regular one. Julie came home from work, tired and annoyed because an experiment had failed, and Chris was in the kitchen making dinner. Pasta, because that was one of the few things he could cook without burning. She dropped her bag, kicked off her shoes, and walked over to hug him from behind. Today was terrible. "Tell me about it," he said. So she did. Talked for 20 minutes about failed protocols and contaminated samples, and how she was pretty sure her supervisor thought she was incompetent. Chris listened while he stirred the pasta. And when she was done, when she'd run out of things to complain about, he turned around and pulled a ring out of his pocket. Just like that. No big speech, no getting down on one knee in some fancy restaurant. Just Chris in their kitchen holding a ring. "I know today was bad," he said. "And I know there's going to be more bad days, but I want to be here for all of them, the bad ones and the good ones. I want to make you pasta when experiments fail and celebrate when they work. I want to build a life with you, so will you marry me?" Julie started crying. Not pretty crying, the kind where you can't catch your breath and your nose runs and you're definitely not attractive. "Yes, obviously yes." He put the ring on her finger, and it was a little too big because he'd guessed her size wrong, just like he'd guessed her coffee order wrong on their first date. She didn't care. She loved it. They got married 4 months later. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. At this little outdoor venue near a lake, Julie wore a simple white dress. Chris wore a suit that his brother helped him pick out. It rained halfway through the ceremony, and everyone had to run inside, and Julie's dress got muddy, and the photographer missed half the shots. It was perfect. Marriage was good. Not perfect because nothing ever is, but good. They settled into this comfortable rhythm. Weekday mornings were chaos, both of them rushing to get ready, fighting over the bathroom, grabbing coffee and toast on the way out. Evenings were quiet. They'd cook together or order takeout, watch TV on the couch, talk about their days. Chris got promoted at work. started managing projects instead of just building. He'd come home and tell Julie about difficult clients and supply issues and crew members who didn't show up. Julie got published. Her research on cellular regeneration made it into a journal. Chris framed the article and hung it in their living room even though Julie thought it was cheesy. "It's not cheesy," he said. "It's proof that you're doing important work." They talked about having kids someday. Not now, because Julie's career was just taking off and Chris was busy with work, but someday. They picked out names, argued over whether they'd get a dog first, made plans for a house with a backyard and room for all the things they wanted to do. On their 5th anniversary, Chris surprised her with a trip. Just a weekend away at this cabin in the mountains. No phone service, no internet, just them. They hiked during the day, sat by the fire at night, and Julie felt more relaxed than she had in years. "We should do this more often," she said. "We will," Chris promised. They didn't. Life got busy again. Work, responsibilities, the everyday grind of existing. But they were happy. They had each other, and that was enough. Year 8. Chris started getting headaches. Not all the time, just occasionally. He'd come home from work, rub his temples, take some ibuprofen. Julie noticed but didn't think much of it. Stress, probably. He'd been working long hours on a big project. "You should take it easy," she'd say. "I'm fine," he'd say. The headaches got worse, more frequent. Chris started taking more ibuprofen, then stronger stuff. Julie pushed him to see a doctor. He kept putting it off. "It's just headaches. I'm tired. I'll rest when the project's done." But the project finished, and the headaches didn't stop. Then came the nausea. Chris would wake up feeling sick, skip breakfast, say he was fine by the time he got to work. Julie started noticing he was losing weight. Not a lot, but enough that his clothes fit differently. Enough that she worried. "You need to see a doctor," she said again. Not asking this time, telling. "I will, I promise." He didn't. Until he collapsed on a job site. Julie got the call at work. Chris's brother panicked, saying Chris had passed out. They'd called an ambulance. He was at the hospital. Julie left immediately, drove faster than she should have, barely remembered parking the car. She found Chris in the ER, conscious but pale. He tried to smile when he saw her. "I'm okay." "You're not okay. What happened?" "Just got dizzy. It's fine." It wasn't fine. They ran tests. Lots of tests. CT scan, MRI, blood work. Julie sat in the waiting room, calling in sick to work, trying not to spiral. Chris's brother sat with her. Neither of them said much. When the doctor came out, Julie knew. You can always tell from their face when it's bad news. They have this look, this professional sadness that they've practiced but never quite perfected. The doctor said a lot of words. Glioblastoma, aggressive, stage 4, inoperable. Julie heard brain tumor and terminal and stopped processing the rest. "How long?" Chris's brother asked. "It's hard to say. With treatment, maybe 12 to 18 months. Without treatment, significantly less." Julie couldn't breathe. They went back to see him together. He was sitting up in the hospital bed, and he knew. He'd already known before they walked in. Julie could see it on his face. "So," he said, "that's not great." Julie started crying. Chris reached for her hand. "Hey, it's okay." "It's not okay. None of this is okay." "I know." They went home that night in silence. Julie driving because Chris wasn't allowed to until the doctors cleared him. They got to their apartment, and everything was exactly the same as it had been that morning. Coffee cups in the sink, Chris's jacket thrown over a chair, the life they'd built just sitting there, unchanged. But everything had changed. Chris decided to do treatment. Not because he thought it would save him. The doctors were clear this wasn't a cancer you beat. This was a cancer you bought time with, but he wanted time, every day he could get. Chemotherapy, radiation, clinical trials. Chris went to every appointment. Julie went with him when she could, rearranged her work schedule, took days off. Chris's brother helped. His mom came to stay for a few weeks. Everyone rallied around them because that's what people do when someone's dying. The treatment was brutal. Chris lost his hair, lost more weight, spent days so tired he could barely get out of bed. The nausea was constant. He had good days and bad days, but mostly bad days. Julie tried to stay strong, tried to be positive, researched experimental treatments, read every study she could find, reached out to colleagues, looked for anything that might help. Chris let her do it because he knew she needed to feel like she was doing something. But he also knew it wouldn't matter. 6 months in, they stopped treatment. It wasn't working. The tumor was growing. The side effects were worse than the disease. Chris's doctors suggested hospice. Chris agreed. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left feeling like garbage," he told Julie. "I just want to be with you." Julie couldn't argue with that. They set up a hospital bed in their living room because Chris couldn't manage the stairs anymore. Julie took a leave of absence from work. Chris's brother came by every day. Friends visited, brought food, sat with them, tried to help. Chris had a list of things he wanted to do. Small things: watch the sunrise one more time, eat his favorite meal, listen to music, hold Julie's hand. On good days, they'd sit together on the couch and watch movies. Old favorites they'd seen a dozen times. Chris would fall asleep halfway through, and Julie would just sit there, watching him breathe, memorizing every detail. On bad days, Chris was in pain. The medication helped, but never enough. Julie would hold his hand, read to him, play his favorite songs, do anything to make it easier. She learned to hide her tears until he was asleep. They talked about everything: memories, regrets, things left unsaid. Chris made her promise she'd keep living after he was gone. "Don't stop because I'm not here. Keep doing your work. Find someone else if you want. Be happy." "I don't want someone else," Julie said. "I know, but someday you might. And that's okay. I want you to be okay." Julie couldn't imagine being okay without him. Chris wrote letters. One for Julie, to be opened after he died. One for his brother, for his mom, for friends. He wanted to say goodbye properly, even though he knew he wouldn't be there to see them read it. He also wrote a list of practical things: bank accounts, passwords, insurance information. Things Julie would need. He was organized about it, methodical, because that's who Chris was. He built things, fixed things, took care of details. "I don't want you to worry about this stuff," he said. "It's all here." Julie hated that list. Hated that he was planning for his own death. Hated how final it all felt. Chris died on a Wednesday morning in March. Hospice had said it would be soon. Days, maybe a week. He'd been sleeping more, eating less, slipping in and out of consciousness. Julie stayed by his side. Barely slept, barely ate, just stayed. That morning he woke up, more alert than he'd been in days. He looked at Julie and smiled. "Hey." "Hey," she said. "I love you." "I love you too." They talked for a little while. Nothing profound, just small talk. Chris asked if his brother was coming by later. Julie said yes. He asked what time it was. Julie told him. He said he was tired. "You should sleep," Julie said. "Yeah, I think I will." He closed his eyes. Julie held his hand. His breathing slowed, and then it stopped. Just like that. No dramatic final words, no big moment. He was there, and then he wasn't. Julie sat there for a long time, still holding his hand, waiting for him to take another breath even though she knew he wouldn't. When she finally let go, her hand was stiff. She called hospice. They came, asked if she wanted to call anyone else first. Julie called Chris's brother. He came right away. They sat together. Not saying much, just being there. The hospice nurse asked Julie if she wanted to stay while they prepared the body. Julie said no. She couldn't watch them take him away. Chris's brother stayed. Julie went outside, sat on the front steps of their building, and stared at nothing. It was a nice day. Sunny, warm for March. People were walking by, going about their lives, and Julie's entire world had just ended and nobody knew. Nobody cared. Life just kept going. The funeral was 5 days later. Julie didn't remember most of it. She wore a black dress that Chris had always liked. His brother spoke. His mom spoke. Julie was supposed to speak but couldn't. Just stood at the podium and cried until Chris's brother came and walked her back to her seat. People said things. He's in a better place. At least he's not in pain anymore. You were so strong. He wouldn't want you to be sad. Julie smiled and nodded and said thank you because that's what you're supposed to do. But inside, she was screaming. Because Chris wasn't in a better place, he was dead. Because she didn't feel strong, she felt shattered. Because of course he wouldn't want her to be sad, but he was gone and she was allowed to be devastated. After, people came back to Chris's brother's house. More food, more talking, more people trying to comfort her. Julie sat in the corner and wanted everyone to leave. They eventually did, and then she was alone. She went home to an empty apartment. The hospital bed was still in the living room. No one had moved it yet. Chris's jacket was still on the chair. His coffee mug was still in the sink, the one he'd used a week before he died. Julie crawled into their bed. His side still smelled like him. She lay there in his space and cried until she ran out of tears. The first month was a blur. People checked on her, texted, called, came by. Julie answered sometimes, ignored them most times. She went back to work because she didn't know what else to do, but she couldn't focus. Her supervisor suggested she take more time. Julie said no. She needed the distraction. She'd come home every day to an empty apartment and forget, just for a second, that Chris was gone. She'd open the door expecting to hear him in the kitchen or on the couch or getting ready for bed. And then she'd remember. Every single day, she had to remember. She stopped cooking, ate cereal for dinner or nothing at all, stopped seeing friends, stopped answering her phone. Just when a work came home existed. Chris's brother came by once a week, brought groceries, made sure she was eating, didn't push her to talk, just sat with her. Julie was grateful. She couldn't handle people who wanted her to process her feelings or heal or move forward. She found Chris's letter in the drawer where he'd left it, waited 2 weeks before she could bring herself to open it. When she finally did, she read it alone, sitting on their bed. He'd written about loving her, about being grateful for every day they'd had, about how she'd made him happier than he'd ever thought possible. He'd written that he was sorry for leaving, sorry for getting sick, sorry for not being there for the life they'd planned. And at the end, he'd written, "You made me feel like I mattered, like my life meant something. Thank you for that. Now go live yours, be brilliant, be happy, be you. I'll always be proud of you." Julie read it 5 times. Then she put it back in the drawer and cried. 3 months after Chris died, Julie found the Post-it notes. She was finally going through his things. His clothes, mostly, donating some, keeping some. She found them in the pocket of his work jacket. A small stack of Post-its he'd never gotten to leave around the apartment. 23 notes, all in Chris's handwriting. Little messages he'd written before he got too sick to write anymore. "You're going to have a great day. Remember to drink water. I'm proud of you. Don't work too hard. You're beautiful even when you're stressed. I love you." Julie sat on the floor of their bedroom, surrounded by his clothes, and read every single one. He'd written them knowing he wouldn't be there to leave them for her. He'd written them anyway. She kept them all, put them in the drawer with the letter and the other notes she'd saved over the years. 6 months out, people stopped checking in as much. Not because they didn't care, but because life moves on. People have their own stuff, their own problems. They'd done their part. Helped during the crisis, showed up for the funeral, supported her through the worst of it. Now they expected her to be getting better. Julie wasn't better. She was just quieter about not being better. She'd learned how to function. Go to work, do her job, come home. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed at jokes, made small talk. But it was all performance. Inside, she still felt empty. She avoided places she and Chris had gone together. Stopped going to their favorite coffee shop, changed her route home to avoid their old apartment building. Couldn't listen to certain songs, watch certain movies. The world was full of landmines, things that would ambush her with grief when she least expected it. She went on a date once because a friend set her up and wouldn't stop pestering her. The guy was nice, normal, talked about his job, asked about hers, paid for dinner. Julie smiled and nodded and felt absolutely nothing. She went home early, told him she wasn't ready, and he said he understood. She deleted the dating app her friend had made her download. A year after Chris died, Julie moved. Not far, just a different apartment. She couldn't stay where they'd lived together anymore. Every corner held a memory. Every room echoed with his absence. She needed a space that was just hers. The new place was smaller. One bedroom, barely enough room for her stuff. But it was new. Clean, no history. Julie unpacked slowly, deliberately. Didn't hang the framed article on the wall, left some boxes unopened. Created a space that felt like moving forward, even if she wasn't sure she was ready. She kept a few things. Chris's watch, which she wore sometimes even though it was too big. His favorite hoodie, which still smelled faintly like him. The drawer of post-it notes. The letter. Photos, not a lot, but enough. People said she was doing well. "You're so strong," they'd say. Chris would be proud. Julie didn't feel strong. She felt like she was faking it, putting on a show of healing while inside she was still a mess. But fake it long enough, and sometimes it becomes real. Year 2 was different. Julie still missed him, every day, but the grief wasn't as sharp. It had dulled into this constant ache, something she'd learned to live with, like a chronic injury you learn to work around. She started saying yes to things again. Dinner with friends, work events, her colleague's birthday party. She still went home alone, still felt the emptiness, but she was trying. That counted for something. She met someone, not dating, just someone she talked to sometimes. A guy who worked in a different lab, who'd lost his wife 3 years ago, who understood what it meant to keep going when the person you loved was gone. They'd get coffee sometimes, compare notes on grief, on the strange, lonely space of life after loss. "Does it get easier?" Julie asked once. "No," he said. "You just get better at carrying it." That made sense. Julie went back to the lake where she and Chris had gotten married, stood there on the shore alone, and remembered the rain, the muddy dress, the way he'd looked at her. She cried, but she also smiled. She was learning that you could hold both, the grief and the gratitude, the pain and the love. Year 3, Julie got a promotion. Lead researcher on a project she'd been working toward for years. The kind of position Chris had always said she'd get. She accepted it and immediately thought about how he'd have celebrated, how he'd have picked her up and spun her around like he did when she defended her thesis. She celebrated alone, ordered takeout, watched a movie they'd loved, toasted with a beer because that's what he would have done. "I did it," she said to the empty room. "You were right, I did it." She liked to think he knew. Julie had coffee with the guy from the lab. They talked about the promotion, about work, about life. And somewhere in the conversation, Julie realized she was laughing. Actually laughing, not just polite social laughing. And it didn't feel wrong. "Chris would have liked you," she said without thinking. Yeah, you're kind. He would have appreciated that." They kept getting coffee. It wasn't dating, Julie told herself, just friendship. Two people who understood loss. But somewhere along the way, it started to feel like maybe it could be more. And that terrified her. Because loving someone meant risking this pain again. Meant opening herself up to the possibility of another goodbye, another empty apartment, another drawer full of memories. But Chris had told her to keep living, to be happy, to find someone if she wanted. "I don't know if I can," Julie said out loud, alone in her apartment. But maybe she could try. Here's what Julie learned about grief. It doesn't have a timeline. People will tell you it gets better after a year, after 2 years, after 5. But that's not how it works. Some days you're fine. Other days you're standing in the grocery store, see someone who looks like them from behind, and you fall apart in the cereal aisle. Grief isn't linear. You don't go through stages and come out healed on the other side. You spiral, you backtrack. You think you're doing okay, and then a song plays and you're right back at the beginning. You never stop missing them. You just learn to live with the missing. It becomes part of who you are, this person-shaped hole that never quite fills in. You build your life around it. You keep going not because the pain stops, but because you have to. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes. Becomes memory, becomes gratitude, becomes all the ways they shaped you into who you are. Julie carried Chris with her every day. In the work she did, the way she saw the world, the person she was becoming. And slowly, painfully, she learned that living wasn't betraying him. That moving forward didn't mean leaving him behind. That she could honor what they had and still build something new. 4 years after Chris died, Julie scattered his ashes. She'd kept them, unsure what to do. Chris hadn't left specific instructions. Just said he didn't care, that cremation was practical, that she should do whatever felt right. It took her 4 years to figure out what felt right. She went back to the lake, same spot where they'd gotten married, where she'd stood alone on their anniversary. She went at sunrise, early morning, when no one else was there. She opened the container, said goodbye, and let him go. The ashes drifted over the water, catching the light. Julie stood there until they were gone, until there was nothing left but the lake and the sunrise and the memory of a man who'd loved her completely. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." And then she went home. Not to the empty apartment where she'd grieved, not to the life they'd planned, but to the new life she was building. The one where she carried him with her but didn't let the loss define her. Julie was okay. Not happy all the time, not healed in some neat, complete way, but okay. She had work she cared about, people who loved her, the possibility of something new on the horizon. She wore Chris's watch on important days, kept the post-it notes in her nightstand, looked at photos when she missed him, and she let herself remember the good parts without drowning in the loss. Because that's what love is, really. It's not the fairy tale. It's not forever. Sometimes it's just 10 years and an illness that comes too soon, and the choice to keep going even when the person who made you feel safe is gone. Julie chose to keep going. Every single day, she chose. And some days, that was enough. If you've lost someone, if you're in that impossible space of learning to live with the missing, I want you to know this. You're allowed to fall apart. You're allowed to not be okay. You're allowed to take as long as you need. But you're also allowed to laugh again, to feel joy, to love someone new if that's what you want, to build a life that honors who you lost without being consumed by the loss. Grief is love with nowhere to go, so you carry it, you make space for it, and you keep living because that's what they would want, because you deserve to. Julie's story doesn't have a happy ending, but it has a real one, and sometimes that's more important. You're going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually. Keep going, one day at a time, one breath at a time. You're allowed to heal. You're allowed to win. Listen closely. The whisper might just change your life.